Hello, and welcome to Paranormal in Pennsylvania,
where we discuss history and hauntings.
Today's story takes us to eastern Pennsylvania and the largest single-day battle of the Revolutionary War. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Erica.
Let's get into it. So, today we're talking about the Brandywine battlefield, and this is pretty close to where I grew up. It wasn't uncommon for us to go here. We went for school, they have events, etc. But strangely, I never knew really the story of the battle or the ghosts, definitely.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm excited to hear about it because I majored in history, focused on the Revolutionary War, and genuinely remember nothing about this. So
it was interesting reading about it because it's the largest single-day engagement of the war, but it's not the bloodiest.
Oh, okay.
It's just, I think, the most troops involved.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
So we do have quite a bit of history for this one, but it's going to make sense when we talk about the ghosts. So the background's important. All of the history comes directly from their website. It's now like either a state or local park, and I highly recommend it to people. They have a lot of great history information. So this battle was September 11th, 1777. And as I said, it was the largest single-day engagement of the American Revolution. There were nearly 30,000 soldiers that squared off in a 10-mile area of roughly 35,000 acres. And the reason it's the largest engagement is because it was those 30,000 soldiers, but that doesn't include civilians, teamsters, it said, I'm not sure what that is, servants, or any other members of the army, like medics, etc.
30,000 is already a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, that
ton.
seems like a lot. I know it's over 10 miles, but still, that's packed.
Yeah. And a lot of people to coordinate.
Right.
On the American side, we have some famous names involved. We have Washington that will come into play, and then Lafayette.
Ooh,
I know.
Hamilton.
Thanks, Hamilton. Okay, so the plan for the British Army was to attack in two separate columns of troops. The idea was to surround Washington, make him think he was facing off against the whole British Army, and then attack him with the second column. So it's a surprise.
Right.
So the column started to march toward the forces, but were met by an artillery camp led by General Maxwell, nearby what is current-day Longwood Gardens. If you're not familiar with Longwood Gardens, it's like Phipps. We have Phipps in Pittsburgh. It's like Phipps, but it's super famous.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of it, but also not super familiar with the area, and so that might be why.
Yeah, I had never heard of it, but my stepmom grew up in upstate New York, and her family would like travel down to see Longwood Gardens. It's pretty famous.
Oh, yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, and it's huge and beautiful.
Yes.
So for people familiar with the area, that's where we are geographically. The standoff with Maxwell delayed them 2 to 3 hours because they slowly would push the Americans back. So it would be like push back, make sure they were clear, like the Americans would fall back. The British would make sure it was clear and then advance. So it took a long time to cover the area.
Right.
On the other column, it was advancing towards what they thought were unguarded American forces, but Washington had placed scouts along the roads kind of in spokes radiating out from where the American army was, and they were caught by a camp of 100 riflemen that acted as the first line of defense against this column. They fought the riflemen and then, drumroll please, stopped for lunch.
Just right in the middle of this standoff, just broke for lunch.
They fought them, the riflemen fell back, and then they were like, it is time to eat.
Right. Just really want that ham sandwich right now.
Right. And so I thought about this while I was researching it, and I mean, you gotta eat, but also you're at war. So what is the over-under for when you get to have a meal?
Sometimes I'm at work and I just don't eat for 8 hours, so I feel like that's a much more intense situation where it would be understandable if you don't eat.
So I don't know, but the positive here was this allowed time for the riflemen to fall all the way back and alert Washington. So the theme here is the British thought that they were going to surprise Washington, and they didn't.
Right.
And that's going to play a role in the ghosts. So the troops, after eating their lunch, advanced to the Quaker Meeting House, which was being used as a field hospital. And noteworthy, this area was primarily inhabited by Quakers who are nonviolent by nature. For those of you that don't know the history of Pennsylvania, William Penn is what Pennsylvania is named after, and he was a Quaker. And we have some special laws, actually, because we're a Quaker state. The Quakers don't have a entity, that's the wrong word. They don't have like a figurehead in their church. So their weddings are just you declare that you're married, and you can do that in Pennsylvania. That's what I did.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's cool. You're married because you say so.
Yes.
But the biggest thing is that they're nonviolent, and they ended up that their meeting house was in the middle of the worst combat. So very unfortunate.
Yes, definitely.
Once the forces all reached the battlefield, the Americans were a mix of veterans and new fighters, but they were up against one of the best brigades in Britain. So the Americans quickly fell.
Right.
However, the other column was confronting Americans that had an advantage in position, so they were able to hold off the British, and this allowed time for Washington and Lafayette to arrive on scene with reinforcements. The fighting that ensued was so intense that some British officers would write that it was the most severe they had seen in their whole military career.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, so that is certainly going to lend itself to some ghosts.
Yes, absolutely.
So, the worst combat that they've seen in their career, and it ended with Washington actually retreating and regrouping. The British stayed in the area for 5 more days and looted everything. And again, this is really unfortunate for the people that lived in the town because they're Quakers, they're nonviolent, they're not going to do anything to stand up against this, and they don't even support war in general.
Right, so they basically just got like taken advantage of.
Yeah. After the 5 days, they advance and go on to fight more. Today, Brandywine Battlefield is a 52-acre park, and it only encompasses what was the epicenter of Washington's continental encampment for this. It's not the whole battlefield itself, since, as I said earlier, the battlefield is like 35,000 acres.
Right, right.
So that's all the history. Now we get into the ghost story. And our first ghost story is not from current day, but it's actually from September 11th, 1777, the day of the battle. And this is called the Guardian Angel of Brandywine Battlefield. A scout was sitting and watching the road, but he had fallen asleep. As we know from the history, these scouts were paramount to the Americans not being crushed in this battle. He woke with a start after hearing a child's voice say, "Your friends are in grave danger. The British are coming." When he looked around, he was alone and there was no evidence of a child.
That's so creepy. Helpful.
Right.
But also so creepy.
I know. And you just hear this like ghost voice in your dreams. Do you decide to trust it? But yes, he did.
Thank goodness he did.
Right. So that's the only ghost from back then. Today there are a few things. So there are reports of a ghost that walks through the battlefield grounds, not necessarily just the park area, but all of the grounds. He walks in a perimeter. And the thing that's specific about this ghost is you can't see his feet. The thought behind this is that the sidewalks that we have now weren't there at the time of the war. And so we're actually a few inches to a foot higher. So he's walking at the level the ground was at that time.
That's so interesting.
I know. I've never thought about it like that. Like not only are the ghosts trapped in their thinking it's their time, but in the environment as it was.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And he walks this perimeter patrolling because it's alleged that this is the man that spoke to the guardian of the battlefield and now like child's voice and now acts as the guardian because he feels so guilty that he fell asleep on his watch. He now forever roams the perimeter watching for British forces to come.
That's such a nice thing to do, but it's kind of sad that he feels the need to stick around there, you know?
Yeah, just day after day. 10 miles. I know. And so for that reason, he's seen in a lot of different locations too.
Oh,
this
that
same
makes sense.
figure, because it's at the park, it's in shopping centers, because like Longwood Gardens is right by shopping centers and stuff. So creepy to see like a Revolutionary War figure when you're shopping at TJ Maxx.
Right. And I think it's interesting too, because I don't think that people could mistake, because his feet are gone.
Yeah.
You know, that's the marker that it's really him all over these places.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's how people have attributed it to the same ghost.
Right.
Within the park, there is the actual field where a lot of it, like I said, it's the center of the encampment. And there's still some structures that are standing there. There's an old farmhouse, and that's said to be home to many spirits. Noteworthy, there's a wounded soldier that lingers there, supposedly because the Quaker meeting house was demolished after. So he now stays in this as a field hospital.
Okay.
And a young female ghost. It's said that the soldier that's there was, like I said, in the field hospital and stood up to help the fight despite being injured, and was actually shot through the wall of the hospital and died.
Oh, no.
So he still lingers, trying to continue to defend.
Right.
And then the ghost, it's said to be like a young female that was maybe helping with the field hospital or in the area, and was just an unfortunate casualty. And she likes to play games. That's her thing.
Oh, okay.
I know, it's like very benign and sweet.
Yes.
So ghost hunters went to this location, this specific farmhouse, and to try to draw her out, they sat on the floor and played marbles, and they did it in a historically accurate way. Like, they looked up how in this time period marbles were played in an attempt to get the ghost to engage with them.
That's so kind and cute to try to really like connect with the ghosts.
Yeah, so clever. Like, appeal to her.
Definitely.
In addition to those two ghosts, human ghosts, I'll say, other sounds can be heard on the battlefield. There's the sound of horses and gunshots that can be heard echoing across the battlefield. And this peaks in the afternoon time, which coincides with after that midday meal.
Oh,
yeah.
That does make sense.
Yeah. So again, looping back to the history section.
Yes.
And people have also reported what they believe to be a war reenactor on the field, because they do Revolutionary War reenactments on the field. But after they watch it, these people for a bit, they just fade and disappear as mist.
See, that's a little creepy, I think. I think if I knew that there were reenactments there and I walked over to try to see one and then it just disappeared, that would be, even though it's been, even though it's nice, even though they're not harmful, it would still freak me out a little bit.
Yeah, I would question my sanity if I saw that.
Definitely.
Even creepier to me is it said that people see horses on the field, and there's a lot of farmland around the park itself, so it's not unreasonable that a horse could have escaped from a nearby farm. But when people either approach the horses to try to, get them, figure out where they came from, or when they go to call animal control, the horses just vanish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that they actually call animal control.
Right.
Like the fact that they've actually reached out to be like, hey, there's a horse.
Yeah.
It's like unexplainable.
Right. And then what do you say?
Oh my God, I hate
I think it's creepier because, like, I think when we think of ghosts, we have a schema in our heads that they're people.
Yes.
But, I mean, I'm sure horses died that day.
Right.
And so maybe they're trapped there as well.
Right, which again is a little sad to think of, a horse trapped in this battle.
Right.
Day in and day out.
Yeah, at least it's a nice field now.
Yeah, at least it's a park. Hopefully they can kind of get the calm ambiance.
Yeah.
That an outdoor park brings.
Yeah. So that's all the ghosts. I've already been here, as I said. I've never had a paranormal experience, but I've also never been there around peak paranormal time, because I would go for like early afternoon events or field trips and we would have to be back at school. Right. So I've never been there in the afternoon post midday meal time slot.
Right.
I would go back. Like I said, there's events, there's like live music and festivals and stuff. So I would absolutely go back. I would go back at dark. I would go back at peak paranormal activity time. Would you go?
Yes, definitely. Again, because this was my, area of focus, this is so interesting. And I myself have never had like a ghost encounter personally. And so I think if I were able to go and maybe go at the peak time and try to see something, I think that would be really cool, especially because it feels like these spirits just need connection a little bit, because they're all kind of still roaming around. So I think that would be a really cool thing to go to.
Yeah, it does feel like the trope of unfinished business.
Yes.
Keeping these ghosts there, where some of the ghosts that we have talked about are like, I don't know, angry, and that's why they're there. It seems like these ghosts don't even realize that time has moved on.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that would be an interesting thing to go in with, just realizing that they still think that it's their time. And the other interesting thing is, like, I wonder if modern day humans, if we were able to make contact with them in a way somehow, and they ended up seeing like our modern clothes, would any of them like sort of realize, or you know what I mean, or would they still kind of be like, oh, we're still here, they're just weird? Who knows?
I would definitely go and at least check it out. It seems like, in terms of places we've discussed, very low risk.
Yes, agreed.
Thank you for listening this week. Tune in next Thursday to see what hauntings we discuss next. Previously in this podcast, I stated that there was 100 riflemen acting as a defense for a column. I'd like to correct that and say that it was musketmen instead of riflemen, just to make sure that we're as historically accurate as possible.